The Broken Bridge. In the heart of New York City, where the skyline pierced the clouds and subways roared beneath the streets, a boy named Mason Cruz stood on the edge of a memory that changed everything. He was just 7 years old when it happened. His father, Javier Cruz, a construction worker from El Salvador, had left early that morning with a kiss on Mason's forehead and a promise, "One day, you'll build something the world can't ignore." But that day never came. Javier was one of 5 workers who died when a bridge under construction collapsed near the East River. Mason remembered the sirens, the flashing lights, the crowd gathered behind police tape, and he remembered his mother collapsing when the foreman came to their doorstep, helmet in hand, tears in his eyes. After the funeral, people moved on. The city repaired the bridge. But Mason didn't move on. His world split in half that day before the collapse and after. His mother, Lucia, worked double shifts cleaning hotel rooms, barely able to hold the family together. They moved to a smaller apartment. Mason grew up faster than most kids his age. He stopped asking for toys. He stopped dreaming. But he never stopped remembering. By the time he was 15, Mason had already decided what his life would be. Not a firefighter, not an astronaut. He wanted to become a structural engineer, the kind of person who built bridges. The kind who made sure no other child had to watch a parent vanish beneath steel and concrete. But dreams, especially ones that big, come at a cost. Mason's high school counselor once told him, "You're smart, but college? It's expensive. Maybe think about a trade school." But Mason had fire in his eyes. He studied at night, worked weekends at a grocery store, and applied for every scholarship he could find. Rejection after rejection landed in his inbox. But then, one morning, he got an email from the New York Technical Institute full scholarship. He didn't cry. He just stared at the screen for 10 minutes in silence. College wasn't easy. Most of his classmates came from privilege. Their backpacks cost more than his monthly rent. Some looked at him like he didn't belong. Some professors doubted his potential. But numbers didn't lie. Mason crushed every exam, every lab, every project. One summer, he interned with Helix Infra, a multinational engineering firm that worked on global-scale infrastructure. On his first day, they handed him blueprints and told him to make coffee. By the end of the internship, the head engineer was calling him the math wizard. But something was missing. During his final semester, Mason took a class on sustainable design. It was taught by an older woman named Professor Leclerc, who had spent 20 years working in post-disaster zones Haiti, Nepal, Indonesia. Her stories weren't about buildings. They were about people. One day after class, Mason stayed back. "Why do we always talk about building skyscrapers?" he asked. "Why not safer homes in flood zones? Why not stronger bridges in poor towns?" She smiled. "Because skyscrapers make money. But what you're asking, that builds legacy." That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He went back to the one photo he had of his father covered in dust, wearing a yellow helmet, grinning like he'd just conquered the world. Mason whispered into the dark, "I'll build something you'd be proud of." After graduation, Mason didn't take the high-paying offer at Helix. Instead, he joined a small nonprofit called Build Right, focusing on infrastructure for disaster-prone areas. His friends thought he was crazy. "You're throwing away 6 figures," they said. But Mason didn't flinch. For 5 years, he worked in silence, rebuilding after hurricanes, stabilizing landslide zones, helping villages reinforce wooden bridges with steel supports. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich, but he was building. And then one day, the call came. A massive infrastructure failure in a Central American city, San Pedro del Norte, had collapsed the only bridge connecting two districts. It was a community not far from where Mason's own father had grown up. Dozens were injured, a few dead. The government had no money. BuildRight was asked to send a team. Mason went personally. The site was haunting: twisted beams, scattered rebar, collapsed roadways. But what struck him most was the children watching from a distance, just as he had once done, eyes wide with fear and confusion. That night, Mason walked the wreckage alone. The air smelled of rust and earth, and for the first time in years, he cried. He didn't cry out of sadness. He cried because he finally knew why he had become what he did. Over the next 6 months, Mason led the project to rebuild the bridge not just structurally, but symbolically. He involved local workers. He trained teenagers. He taught the science behind the steel. When the bridge finally opened, it wasn't just stronger, it was smarter. It had embedded sensors that tracked stress points. It had open access design files anyone could download. It had his father's name engraved quietly into one of the cornerstones. Javier Cruz Worker, Father. Foundation. News of the project spread globally. Engineering journals featured it. Universities invited Mason to speak. But when a major firm offered to buy his bridge monitoring technology for millions, Mason declined. "This belongs to the people," he said. "Safety shouldn't be a privilege." Instead, he open-sourced the entire tech-heavy blueprint. Every sensor schematic, every piece of code. NGOs from Africa, Asia, and South America began using it. Bridges in small villages became safer. Students in remote towns studied his models. One evening, years later, Mason stood on that same bridge in San Pedro, now bustling with life. Vendors, children, buses, life moving forward. A boy ran past him, paused, and looked up at the engraved name. "Señor," the boy asked, "was he your father?" Mason nodded. The boy smiled. "Then he must be proud." Mason didn't answer. He looked toward the sunset, then back at the bridge. A once broken structure now stood unshakable. Not because of fame, not because of fortune, but because of purpose. He had taken tragedy and turned it into a blueprint for hope. He had become what he once needed. And in doing so, he had built something the world couldn't ignore. In the years that followed, Mason Cruz became more than just an engineer. He became a silent revolution. Not building monuments, but momentum. Not chasing headlines, but hope. After San Pedro's success, he could have built a company. He could have made millions. But he chose something deeper. He chose silence and service. He traveled not as an expert, but as a listener. He sat with flood victims in Congo, listened to villagers in Nepal, drew bridges in the sand with children in refugee camps. He wasn't building steel anymore. He was building dignity. Governments called him naive. Corporations called him a dreamer. But he kept going because he didn't need approval. He had purpose. At a global summit, a CEO mocked him. When will you cash in your brilliance? Mason smiled. The day safety stops being a luxury. Then came the earthquake. Magnitude 8.1 Southeast Asia. Dozens of bridges collapsed. Help was slow. Mason didn't wait. He launched Project Foundationless. No investors. No PR. Just people. Local teens mixing cement. Children calculating load capacity on blackboards. Engineers learning from farmers. Together, they built bridges that outlasted blueprints. Each structure bore a small plaque, designed by the people, for the people. His philosophy spread. Universities rewrote curriculums. Villages sent him hand-drawn thank you notes. Young students across continents studied his models. But Mason remained restless. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted others to feel remembered. A child once asked, "How can I become like you?" He handed him a rusted tape measure. Don't become me. Become better, and remember, not all bridges are visible. Then one day, he disappeared. No farewell, no press release, just vanished. Some say he died. Some say he still builds. But all say he left the world stronger. Years later, outside a university, a quote is carved in stone. He didn't build bridges to be seen. He built them so no one would be forgotten. Mason Cruz.